Haruka Nozomi, brimming with energy and determination, reflected on 3 years of hard work, combining part-time work as a mercenary with his studies. Because now his efforts had been crowned with success, he was admitted to a prestigious university. Inspired by this achievement, he vowed to fully commit to virtual reality before starting classes, deciding to live a new life there and experience everything that had previously been just a dream. Then, with undisguised delight, the young man loudly announced the start of the competition, encouraging the others, but an older competitor sharply rebuked him. Afterward, the young man had to push the massive object with all his might, marking the first test of his resolve. Meanwhile, the young man lay quietly on the patterned surface as the narrative heralded the beginning of his new adventures in a world where reality and fantasy merge. Haruka woke up to find himself in an unfamiliar place. He looked around in confusion until he suddenly heard someone calling his name, and then a mirror appeared before him, welcoming him to Arcadia. A moment later, another person appeared before him, inviting him into another reality and asking why he had come and what he was looking for. Before Haruka could answer, he felt an unknown force pull him into the portal, and he began to fall into the abyss. He then landed at the cave entrance and was astonished to realize that his clothing had changed, and a holographic menu had appeared in midair. The name Haru glowed on the screen, confirming his digital incarnation. Gradually, he realized that the device hanging before his eyes wasn't a mini-map, but a radar. Then the young man spotted a distinct trail ahead and, overcome with excitement, resolutely followed it deeper into the tunnel. He soon spotted the massive golem and realized with delight that it was real. Watching the stone body's slow movements, the boy figured he could slip past, though he suspected it was probably a mock battle. However, as he approached the cave entrance, the cracked creature suddenly extended its hand. He backed away in surprise, and the monster, as if mocking, uttered a greeting. The raised hand exuded tense energy, causing the man standing opposite to become wary. He then tried to figure out what exactly this bulky opponent intended to do. Instantly realizing he was facing a true enemy, the young man was indignant at being thrown into battle, an unarmed player. After a brief moment of reflection, he decided to retreat and return when he was ready, but a sharp noise was heard behind him. Kaito, realizing there was no turning back, saw a giant stone creature burst from the ground. He realized the scenario was predetermined, and this was a planned defeat. Then he wondered if he would be saved in time or forced to die and be resurrected again and again. At that moment, he realized he had faced his first death, remembering how he had always accepted death calmly in other games. But now Kaito felt a surge of adrenaline and was determined to fight to the end, believing that this was the true pleasure of such trials. Then he miraculously dodged a stone fist, almost landing face first on the ground, and mentally chuckled that such a death would be too absurd even for him. Kaito studied the giant carefully and noticed that his main weapon was his right hand. The monster was growing larger but moving slowly, so the young man concentrated and prepared for the first strike. Haru delivered a furious punch, shouting the name of the move, but his opponent instantly blocked. He then admitted with grim satisfaction that he had expected this outcome. Kaito then kicked the wall with all his might, claiming it was 3 times more powerful than his punch. He wasn't about to give up and, laughing, challenged his opponent, calling him a stonehead. Thus they confronted the monster known as the Trial Stone Idol. The young man wondered if there was some special meaning behind this name, and suddenly doubted that the battle was truly doomed to failure. Lux realizes that defeat here was likely intended by the developers as an inevitable outcome, but notices that the Stone Idol of Trial's health bar has decreased slightly after his kick. He then realizes that victory is possible, albeit through a narrow path that will only open with the complete destruction of the enemy. After this, he winces in pain, squeezing his legs, and admits that his earlier words about a hidden route were just a guess that had no real basis. After 3 hours of grueling blows, Kaito kneels, breathing heavily, and looks down at his fallen opponent. Then he realizes he's finally finished this grueling battle, where every movement required superhuman effort. Upon rising, he notices new titles, Fighter and Indomitable, which enhance his experience and endurance. After this, the boy decides the way forward is clear and firmly declares to himself that it's time to move forward without hesitation. Walking through the majestic hall, he hears a voice welcoming his awakening and praising his strength of spirit. The voice then offers a special dialogue, accessible only to those who have earned such titles. Kaito notices that the game's systems are gradually revealing themselves. After receiving the divine protection of war, he understands why he didn't receive experience for winning. The reward wasn't in numbers, but in recognition. Looking around the room, he wonders what to do next. Perhaps he needs to choose one of the objects standing on an elegant pedestal, surrounded by a soft glow and magical symbols. The narrative then explains that the world of Arcadia is divided into 4 factions, which are in a state of perpetual conflict, which, however, is more reminiscent of a competition for glory, than a real war. It goes on to explain that each faction is under the control of its own deity, and the blessings received depend on the player's choices. The boy wonders what exactly these divine protections mean and how important they are. He stands before 4 symbols: Vester, Istia, Swordholm, and Northalia. Each promises specific benefits and curses, forcing him to carefully consider his choice. Then he remembers how he once spent 2 months in another MMORPG getting a rare item, tired of endless battles, but still continued for the sake of a tiny chance of success, shedding tears from fatigue and stubbornness. With a smile, he decides to join the Istia faction, the most unpopular of all, because there are fewer competitors and more room for growth, especially before the upcoming war. Suddenly, a girl with a striking appearance appears in front of him, and they freeze, looking at each other in the glowing digital space, surprised by the very fact of this meeting. A moment later she rushes to his side, helping him up, asking worriedly if he is okay, while the other one watches from afar, not daring to intervene. Kaito calmly replies that he doesn't feel any pain in the game, and sees relief appear on his interlocutor's face, mixed with interest, making him think about how to act next. Later, the girl sits down on the grass, and the narration clarifies that she is a character created by the player. As in Arcadia, you can change your appearance as you please. The guy then apologizes, and another player smiles and remarks that the main thing is to enjoy what's happening. She explains that she was simply running around the starting area and was surprised to see someone for the first time in 3 years since the game's release. She then joyfully realizes that he's also a newbie, calling the encounter a remarkable coincidence. Kaito hesitates, trying to figure out what to say, remembering how he thought he had learned how to communicate during his time as a mercenary, but now his confidence is fading. Then he admits it's pure coincidence, feeling like a teenager with no experience with girls. He sits awkwardly across from her, unsure how to continue the conversation. She smiles softly, and he, gathering his courage, raises his hand and offers to join a party, at least for a short time, since they have the chance to meet in this world. The boy gazed at the girl with admiration, thinking that her soul was as beautiful as her appearance. Then she smiled softly and sincerely, forever cementing the image of a true beauty in his mind. Suddenly, mushroom-like creatures with caps like honey mushrooms leaped out of the shadows and attacked with fury. A girl with long silver hair screamed in terror as one of the monsters charged straight at her. Then Haru Sora confidently raised his sword, while the woman standing next to him prayed, asking her opponent to humbly accept defeat. The air filled with the whistle of metal and the scent of digital magic. After the fight, Sora apologized for making Haru do all the work. But Haru merely chuckled and said he'd have been much more surprised if Sora had managed to complete the dungeon alone. They then left the dangerous area, and the boy, reminiscing about the past, told how they were attacked by mushrooms after only 10 steps. The girl, walking behind, listened with amazement and slight alarm. The young player happily noted that he had starting equipment in his inventory and summoned a sword, shimmering with a soft light. The girl behind him nodded in agreement, but still looked wary. Kaito watched as the stranger fought desperately, swinging her weapon awkwardly. He thought she was probably new to the VR world, as her movements betrayed fear and confusion. The narration revealed that this was their first death. After respawning, they found themselves in the starting clearing among green hills and distant mountains, where peace reigned, as if the game itself were allowing them to take a break. He then explained that they couldn't proceed further until they broke through the forest. After apologizing for their failure, he heard her admit the blame, but he suggested a different plan: eliminate the enemies one by one, leveling up. The boy noticed that she closed her eyes every time she entered a fight. He then wondered how long the training would take as she clenched her fist and tried to gather her courage. After that, he confidently declared that he would become her knight and deal with the mushroom monsters. The girl nodded decisively, and below, in the sunlight, new enemies were already rising from the thicket. Haru saw he had reached level 6 and allocated points to agility and flexibility. Enemies crowded around him, but next to him, the girl calmly prepared for battle, breathing evenly and confidently. Later, while relaxing, they discussed stats. One of them invested points in spirit and luck, adding that stats could be redistributed. The other was surprised and admitted he hadn't followed game updates for 3 years. He then remarked that in the previous battle he'd realized that two-handed swords and axes could destroy an enemy with a single blow. She considered increasing her strength, while he, unaccustomed to close combat, decided to study magic. The narration explained that abilities are acquired automatically based on actions, and each player develops a unique skill tree. At that moment, the girl encouraged her companion, and suddenly a monster jumped out of the bushes. Kaido thought she was taking things too seriously. She then admitted that she hated her own powerlessness, but he calmly replied that one could get used to these feelings, the main thing was not to give up. When she learned the healing light spell, her face lit up with gratitude. He said that the healing ability was a great support, even if it lacked attack power. Kaido excitedly announced he'd unlocked a new skill, multi-weapon mastery, which grants mastery of multiple blade types. Ellis inquired if it was useful and learned it was passive but enhanced everything else. The girl happily congratulated her partner, and he, blushing, thought that she was truly special. Her smile made his heart beat faster. Kaido remarked that he was speaking freely to her, even though he didn't even know her age. Then Ellis suggested they keep up the pace, admiring Haru's purity and sincerity, as if she were proud of him as her own student. Kaido swiftly sliced through the mushroom creature, instantly leveling up to 10. Ellis, noticing his surprise, asked what had happened. Then they read the description of the new skill, Quick Switch, which allowed him to instantly switch weapons. Kaido wondered if it was a god-tier skill. After this, he confidently ordered them to watch and drew the bowstring, preparing to fire an arrow. The girl next to him couldn't help but exclaim in surprise, amazed at his dexterity. Inspired by his increased adaptability, Kaido felt as if magic had awakened within him. He joyfully celebrated the transition from level 10 to level 11 after 2 hours of travel, walking alongside Ellis along a verdant path among the tall trees. They soon encountered a huge creature, resembling a misshapen tree covered in mushrooms. One of them anxiously acknowledged that the enemy looked dangerous, while the other agreed that it was clearly quite strong. Kaido then told Sora that he would once again lead the attack and rely on her support. She promised to do her best as a healer. He added that the boss likely had complex moves, so they needed to keep their distance and be prepared to retreat. Sunlight filtered through the foliage, and Kaido encouraged everyone, declaring that even defeat was merely an opportunity to grow stronger. He then suggested that they view battle as an adventure and savor it. He eagerly began the fight with the motionless mushroom monster, confidently identifying its type and weaknesses. Mira stood to the side, watching the proceedings with surprise and incomprehension. At that moment, the young man leaped from a tall tree branch, shouting for Haru to cover him. As he hit the ground, he chuckled, admitting the impact had been far more powerful than he expected. Then he swung his sword decisively, intending to cut off the attacking branch. The girl below looked up at him with wide eyes, full of hope and admiration. A horde of creatures burst forth from the depths of the forest, wielding giant mushrooms as weapons. Kaido fought back with all his might, feeling their power, but chuckling to himself, after all, they were just mushrooms. He cast the healing light spell, and Syra thanked him, warning him that if she drew too much attention, all the smaller enemies would rush at Sora, so she would have to conserve her strength. Then Kaido instantly switched weapons and charged, determined to end the fight as quickly as possible. His movements resembled scenes from an old manga he'd once read, sharp, polished, and bold. The enormous creature suddenly spoke, warning that there were too many enemies. Kaido perked up and listened as the monster mentioned its children, causing everyone to freeze for a moment. After this, Kaido switched weapons again, and the sword he had thrown earlier returned to its sheath. He realized with delight that he could throw blades in quick succession, and then activated a new technique, Great Axe Boomerang, which cut through his enemies in a whirlwind of steel. The girl watched in horror as the boy was thrown into the air by a powerful blow from a giant sword. Just a moment ago, she had thought he was invulnerable, but now she watched his fall in bewilderment. Kaido stood up, clutching his sword, as Ellis worriedly warned that the boss had broken free of control. Nearby, the strange mushroom creatures trembled, reacting to the giant tree's awakening. At that moment, one of the fighters rushed forward, stunning the dark-haired youth. He turned to the girl with a smile, but, noticing her gaze, he became embarrassed and quickly accused her of distracting him. He then admitted that he'd been distracted by the results screen, letting his excitement get the better of him. In that moment, he realized he'd accidentally revealed his wild side to an innocent and beautiful girl. Feeling awkward, he awkwardly apologized for his awkward behavior. The girl tried to keep the conversation going, smiling tensely, but noticed his embarrassment and inner tension. Then he hastened to assure her that he hadn't meant anything strange. She looked at him with genuine regret, and the boy realized he'd suffered a crushing blow to his pride, one from which no man could ever recover. Lux watched silently as Kaido, his eyes wet with tears, explained that the distribution of stats was an almost sacred moment, bringing joy and healing to the soul. Then she quietly called his name, unsure of what to say, seeing him literally tremble with delight. The next second, both Kaido and Ellis were watching the screen warily when something strange happened. Ellis held her breath, and then the scene suddenly changed. A sudden and majestic event unfolded in the sky above the treetops. Meanwhile, a crowd of adventurers had gathered in the bustling square near the fountain. Some of the townspeople noticed the newcomers with curiosity and joyfully welcomed them to Istia, eager to celebrate their arrival. Someone in the crowd remarked that if two people had joined the same faction, they were probably related. Others laughed, teasing the boy about his jealousy and loneliness, insisting that the couple looked like true lovers. One of the onlookers noticed they were standing too close together. The girl, noticing this, became embarrassed, and the boy forced a hesitant smile, feeling a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. Ellis awkwardly apologized, but Kaido calmly assured her there was nothing to worry about, mentally ordering himself to wipe away his silly smile. Nearby, a group of players were discussing how cute she was and warning each other not to be rude to newcomers. Kaido suddenly froze, realizing something important was happening today. At that moment, Syra, blushing and holding a map in her hand, sarcastically mocked some loser with a typical face, while acknowledging a hint of envy mixed with admiration. The crowd laughed, making fun of the young man who'd supposedly been abandoned. He stood silently, unsure what was happening, until one of the girls vanished in a bright flash of light, leaving him bewildered. After this, Kaido felt regret and confusion. He realized that he never added her to his friends list and now he doesn't know if he will ever meet her again. Elsewhere, a guy was lying on his bed when an angry female voice called his name. The woman scolded him sharply for playing all day, and he sheepishly apologized and mumbled a question about how to quit the game. The next morning, Haru stood by the fountain in the same bustling square, remembering he'd gone to bed early. Armored warriors passed by, and the sounds of the city seemed surprisingly alive. Kaido recalled how he'd been ordered to work all night, and now the first thing he did was log into the game. He pondered the time difference between reality and the virtual Arcadia as he walked through the futuristic streets of the new city. As he moved, he noticed his body felt unusually light and responsive. He then realized that his agility and reaction time had increased to superhuman levels, though he'd expected to get used to this over time. Running through the courtyard surrounded by buildings, he considered his next move. Several figures stood in the shadows nearby, silently observing his training. Kaido paused, puzzled, as Syra approached him. A memory of the smiling girl's face and a brief conversation about what things would be like if Sora were there flashed through his mind. He worriedly thought he looked like a rookie without a weapon, and realized that all his items were temporary, intended only for training. Then the armored character calmly counted his accumulated currency and selected his next target. At the gunsmith's, a young woman smiled warmly at a customer, asking how she could help. He explained he was looking for some blades, and she clarified that the store only sold basic equipment. Kaido admitted he was new, so it wasn't a problem. The saleswoman warmly replied that no travelers had come in for 6 months and asked if it was his first time in Istia. He nodded. As they talked, he wondered why the word Istia sounded so awkward and decided that NPCs probably called players travelers. Meanwhile, the girl, smiling, called up a holographic list of weapons, sorted by material. Kaido confidently stated that with the quick change skill, he would become a walking arsenal, adding that he didn't even need to choose, he could wield everything at once.
Kaito confidently told the saleswoman he wanted to buy one of each of the lower-rank iron weapons.
The saleswoman raised her eyebrows in confusion, unsure how to respond to such an odd request, but proceeded to place her order anyway.
Then a girl standing nearby anxiously asked what the problem was.
The young man calmly explained that he preferred fighting with a constant change of weapons rather than with a single chosen style, as he saw strength in variety. After purchasing it, he noticed the weight limit on the equipment and realized that his earlier training gear was weightless. This realization forced him to acknowledge how difficult the beginner's journey can be without support. The saleswoman explained that, considering armor, consumables, and loot, the maximum she could buy was one heavy weapon with a light spare blade or 2 medium sabers. Kaito sighed, mentally bidding farewell to his dream of becoming a walking arsenal. Then he counted the remaining funds and realized he only had enough for a large axe and a straight sword. Memories of Ellis's recent apology surfaced in his mind as he gazed into the distance at the endless horizon plain, where the path of the newcomers began. In the distance, they spotted a herd of stupid boars peacefully grazing on the grass. Kaito noted that these creatures are not aggressive unless provoked, and can be observed calmly from a distance. He thought about the rare weapon that didn't take up inventory space, and Ellis reminded him that carrying capacity increases with level. Then Kaito realized that with his current weight, he wouldn't even have room for potions. Noticing the monster just charging up its attack, he prepared to strike with his spear. But suddenly, the enemy deftly dodged and rushed towards him with unexpected speed, causing the boy to freeze in shock.
Haru watched in stunned silence as his character was destroyed in a single blow.
He realized these boars had colossal strength and endurance, so he decided to take a different approach, either a sneak attack or a rear attack after dodging.
Kaito rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the deadly ram.
The ground shook beneath the beast's hooves, and he realized the situation was becoming critical. The boar was gaining speed with every second. He irritably wondered how long it would take to defeat these enemies and move on to the next location. His gaze wandered across the endless plain, where not even a hint of a boss was visible. Then the boy clenched his fists and declared with determination that he would simply run from one end of the plain to the other. His steps resounded loudly, as if the earth itself were echoing the challenge.
He wondered again how many more battles lay ahead before reaching the new zone. The monotonous field stretched around him, and the further he walked, the clearer it became. There was no sign of the boss ahead. Still, he firmly resolved to go all the way, without turning back. The ground beneath his feet began to vibrate, as if something were awakening, and a strange feeling of anticipation grew in his chest. A moment later, he was running at full speed, cursing loudly, while a whole herd of enraged boars raced after him, their roars mingling with the thunder of hooves and the echo of the wind. Every time he flew past new creatures, they immediately became aggressive and rushed after him. Kaito had to constantly maneuver, dodging the onslaught.
He remembered that, according to the game rules, attacking enemies resulted in instant death and a penalty -10 levels for 12 hours. Even veterans feared such a fate. The girl watched from afar as he ran for a long time without changing the landscape, until suddenly she noticed a silhouette in the distance. Something was approaching quickly and threatening. Gritting his teeth in determination, Kaito realized his strength was waning and his stamina was nearly exhausted. At that moment, a furious creature burst out of the downpour, charging straight at him, heightening the desperation of the moment. Then Kaito, clenching his fist, felt a surge of anger. He assumed a defensive stance, but an explosion thundered ahead, blinding him and leaving his body weakened, as if the game were testing his mettle. Kaito instantly changed his stance and delivered a powerful kick to the monster, warning him not to underestimate humans. He then retreated as two wolf-like beasts, growling and bristling, rushed toward him from the tall grass. Then he hurled the heavy weapon, shouting that this was precisely what it was made for. Looking at his defeated enemies, Kaito grinned and told them to reflect on their defeat, promising to wait for their return when they were ready.
Meanwhile, Sora, feeling slightly uneasy but still hopeful, disappeared into the noisy crowd, trying to blend in.
She recalled the strange events of the previous day and wondered if she would ever see him again. The girl considered his hot-tempered side, deciding he'd simply gotten carried away. After that, she decided to ask the locals to find Haru-san. Two men in armor stood nearby, and she firmly vowed to figure things out on her own. Suddenly, she heard a familiar voice and turned around. The boy, noticing her, exclaimed Haru-san's name with genuine surprise. He looked around in confusion, while another girl nearby awkwardly addressed Sora. The next morning, Kaito and Ellis exchanged restrained greetings. Both looked awkward, barely concealing their nervousness and unsure where to place their hands as tension hung in the air. When the girl unexpectedly grabbed his arm, he froze, unsure how to react, wondering whether he should thank her for the intimacy. She mockingly warned him that if he tried to act stupid, he could easily get a slap. Kaito silently noted that fate had clearly decided to create a romantic scene, and felt a strange sense of pride. The girl felt the same awkward warmth, and the boy was determined to savor Arcadia and every moment of it. Elsewhere, a girl stood guard, knife in hand, while behind her, a man with a hammer prepared for battle. It was clear that Sora was experiencing the same emotions as them, a mixture of anxiety and determination. He silently promised himself that he wouldn't allow this to turn into a romantic comedy, and he resolved to view the girl as a little sister. She agreed, slightly embarrassed, without objection. A little later, the boy timidly asked Sora if she wanted to add him as a friend. She, confused but smiling, said yes, agreeing. The girl blushed when she heard that any guy would be happy to be friends with someone like her. These words caught her off guard, but they brought a slight joy to her soul. The guy, with a good-natured smile, said he'd really enjoyed the game the previous day and suggested they hang out again. His impeccable business smile seemed genuine, and the girl, touched, nodded silently, accepting his friend request in the town square. Kaito suggested they go to a good shop he frequented. Mira excitedly showed off her newbie ring and leather armor, feeling noticeably stronger. Kaito remarked that he still looked like a newbie, despite the weapons he'd bought. The girl agreed to keep her distance, acknowledging that her opponent was too agile. Two players standing nearby chuckled, calling the boars weak and unworthy of attention. The boy inquired if these enemies were strong enough to defeat Haru. He then explained that the enemies he had been reborn from were completely different. Meanwhile, two wolf-like creatures were grazing nearby. A silhouette, distorted by the darkness, emerged from the shadows and declared that it wasn't other enemies they were talking about, but the true leader of these boars. The atmosphere instantly grew tense. The group discussed an enemy known as the bear boar, capable of creating earthquakes and stunning enemies. One player admitted to having been trampled by it once because he failed to notice the warning while fighting a crowd. Kaito suggested hunting down enemies one at a time to avoid taking risks. Ellis hesitantly agreed, adding that she couldn't attack yet, as her only skill was the healing hand art. The girl frowned thoughtfully, realizing her ability wasn't suited for attack. Kaito, meanwhile, was pondering how she could survive on the front lines without offensive abilities, trying to come up with a defensive plan for her. The boy excitedly asked why the girl was still unarmored, considering she was easily defeating enemies. She nervously replied that she was afraid of dying from a single blow, worried about her vulnerability and the fragility of her body. Then she happily announced she'd learned a new skill, and a nearby player explained that this move only activates when an ally takes damage. The skill description stated that it boosts all stats by 20% when in danger. The girl's eyes widened in surprise, and the boy, scratching his head, muttered awkwardly, wondering whose fault it was that she'd learned such a risky skill. She pouted in response, expressing mild displeasure, but she didn't deny her pride. Ellis confidently announced that she would fight alone, asking the others to stand back. At that moment, a warning appeared on the screen about the boss's approach. Sora used her Watcher's Cry ability, surprising Haru by revealing his potential future potential. A huge boar burst from the thicket and roared piercingly. The boy stepped forward with delight, challenging the monster and smilingly declaring that it was time for revenge, ignoring the threat posed by the beast. The ground shook beneath their feet as one of the participants shouted at Sora to retreat, as the forced animation from the vibration was about to begin. Meanwhile, the other gripped the hilt of his sword, bracing himself for the impact of the wave. One of the fighters enthusiastically demonstrated a leaping dodge, deftly soaring above a clawed enemy attacking from below. His movements seemed almost acrobatic, causing everyone to involuntarily hold their breath. Kaito charged, promising to repay the monster for his previous defeat. Ellis gasped in surprise, dreading the sudden confrontation and unable to comprehend where his determination came from.
Jumping down, Kaido plunged his blade into the boar-like monster's massive body and shouted for it to die. However, after the blow, the monster activated its destructive ability, causing the boy to retreat warily and reflect on the cruelty of Arcadia's world. Then he caught the girl's piercing gaze. It took his breath away. The world seemed to spin in a vortex of patterns, and the tense atmosphere gave the moment a special emotional heaviness. Kaido tried to calm his mind, telling himself to keep his heart balanced. He was afraid his emotions would undermine his concentration, and he internally scolded himself for looking like a complete fool in front of her. Gathering his wits, he praised his own attack and addressed the monster again, calling it the king of idiots. At that very moment, the beast lunged forward, and Kaido managed to react instantly to the furious attack. The boy barely managed to dodge the sharp fangs, and the girl cried out in relief, noticing that he had avoided the blow literally at the last split second. Another young fighter confidently declared that he didn't take the monster seriously, dismissing it as small prey. However, the next moment, the beast roared and lunged forward, fangs and claws flashing. Ellis watched in horror as a hail of rocks rained down from the sky. Two boys deftly dodged them, and one of them managed to execute a perfect roll, displaying surprising calm for a novice and earning her genuine admiration. She noted that Haru-san didn't seem to realize that such movements were impossible immediately after entering this world. Just then, a furious attack descended on the wolf-like creature, tearing through the air. Kaido was baffled by why Haru-san still acted like a complete newbie, even though the game was 3 years old and still popular among veterans. The contrast left him with an irritated curiosity. The young man swung his sword with enthusiasm, and the girl watched quietly, amazed by his skill and wondering if he himself realized how impressive his fight looked. The long-haired girl blushed in surprise, and at the same moment, the boy slashed his sword at the roaring beast. His reaction was lightning fast, allowing him to avoid death at the last moment. After a tough battle, Kaido defeated the boar and earned new titles for his victory and acrobatic prowess. A joyful cheer from the crowd congratulated him on his absolute victory, and the atmosphere around him filled with jubilation. The young man was surprised to see the goddess of victory looking at him with displeasure. He quickly decided to smooth things over before she lost her temper, mentally noting that even with her stern expression, she looked charming. Kaido nervously thought he was acting out of character, as if he were trying to flirt. Ellis, embarrassed and blushing, reacted emotionally, and he hastened to assure her that her movements were perfect, thanking her for the buffs and support in battle. He recalled how he deftly dodged several fireballs in a row, despite doubting his basic stats. The girl blushed slightly, deciding to take this as proof that skill was precisely what had made him successful. The guy asked cheerfully if she'd acquired any new skills since the battle. She glanced at the device and admitted she hadn't fought in battles today because she'd been bored, but she'd been intrigued by a skill called Observer's Eye. Kaido wondered what kind of skill it could be, and Ellis hesitantly replied that it allowed him to see his opponent's movements more clearly and accurately, as if slowing down his perception of the world. Then he pointed at the wild boar and suggested a sudden dash forward. Ellis noted that there was usually a delay between observation and action, but with this new skill, she felt it shortened, making Kaido wonder how logical this was. The girl excitedly declared it a combat skill, explaining that it shortened the time needed for perception, analysis, and reaction, while increasing processing speed. Kaido acknowledged that it was extremely useful, but still questioned whether it wasn't too similar to a regular combat skill. Saira explained that for the ability to be most effective, a ranged weapon, like a bow, was needed. The boy skeptically remarked that they were still a long way from firearms, so she decided to test the eye of the observer with a bow. Soon the young man asked anxiously if Sora was with her and if she was okay, then managed to catch her when she staggered, unable to see the road, weakened and losing her balance. The girl felt dizzy again, just like before. The guy watched her with concern, recalling a similar incident from his part-time job at a bar, where he'd seen customers with similar symptoms after overexertion. Sora felt like she'd lose all her strength if she moved. He worriedly asked if everything was okay, and she quietly replied that she just needed a little time to recover. The girl gently suggested he lie down, but he, sheepishly scratching the back of his head, said he could probably manage. Then he awkwardly apologized for disturbing her and thanked her, surprised by her kindness. Sitting on the ground, catching her breath, she explained that the skill she'd used had caused everything around her to blur,
making even stationary objects appear to be moving. Hearing this, her partner looked at her with concern. Kaito admitted that his own perception of information was intermingled with what he saw through the observer's eyes. Ellis could hardly believe such a skill was even possible, feeling overwhelmed by the data flow, while Mira timidly hoped that she would get used to it with time. After a rest, they discussed how to practice their skills on the slow-moving boars. One of them suggested using himself as a backrest, which surprised the girl, but she gratefully accepted. Then they walked across the open plain. The girl sheepishly denied asking for support, and the boy, smiling, assured her that she could comfortably lean on him, though he had hidden reasons for doing so. She blushed and made a shy but charming gesture. The boy looked at her with surprise and slight admiration, and then they exchanged confident glances, after which she asked if he would allow her, and he readily agreed. Kaito leaned back against a tree, looking relaxed and confident, while Ellis sat next to him, nervously biting her lip. Her gaze was troubled, as if she were trying to suppress thoughts she shouldn't have spoken. He figured he could endlessly waste time in an MMO simply by opening the stats window. He then began distributing 60 points between strength, agility, accuracy, endurance, and intelligence, assessing the optimal balance. Recalling his original plan to emphasize agility and accuracy, he wondered if he should team up with Sora more often. Meanwhile, the girl was wondering if she should abandon her solo build and embrace a team strategy. The girl reflected on Sora's progress as a support healer, feeling unfair that her role was limited to mere observation. Meanwhile, her two comrades cheerfully encouraged her, reminding her that the most important thing was to enjoy playing together. Kaito realized that his fighting style would stop working if he reached his inventory limit, as his weight was already at 200 out of 200. He then realized that his weak defense was due not only to his stats, but also to his lack of armor. He was wearing only simple clothes. Reflecting on his skills, the young man concluded that fighting with just a sword was a waste of his potential. After checking his statistics, he decided to further develop his path as a versatile fighter, proficient in any weapon. The heroes demonstrated a series of acrobatic moves, alternating swift leaps with body slams that activated a damage bonus and knockback effect on the enemy. Everything looked harmonious and spectacular, like a dance of combat coordination. He noted that the boar's heart skill activates after a running start and is a powerful battering ram. Kaito then realized he could increase his agility through acrobatics without spending points on accuracy. Ellis happily announced her new title, Link Weaver, explaining that it slightly boosted the stats of the target ally during team battles. Kaito, surprised, asked who exactly the effect affected, clearly intrigued. The girl, slightly out of breath, apologized for the wait and asked how he was feeling. He confidently replied that he was ready for a real fight and could now handle even a stronger opponent. She cheerfully declared that the next step would be to find a suitable weapon. The blonde woman next to her braced herself for the challenge, while the young man stood beside her on the vast meadows of horizon, feeling the gentle breeze. Lux calmly assured her that she would intervene if the situation became dangerous. Meanwhile, Mira concentrated, raised her bow, and drew the string, preparing to shoot with determination in her eyes. Kaito delivered a powerful swing of his weapon, stunning Mira. She apologized in fear, but he merely smiled and asked if she had activated the eye of the observer. She admitted that the skill was still working. The boy explained that the skill's duration depended on the player's mana reserves. As long as they had enough, the effect continued, but the energy gradually depleted. The girl listened attentively, standing nearby and observing his actions. The girl, slightly nervous, agreed to go to the front, and the boy promised to hold off the attacks. The other two exchanged glances, apologizing in advance for the possibility of accidentally shooting each other with an arrow. One of the participants urged Haru on with joyful anticipation. He noted her genuine enthusiasm and wondered if she was older or younger than him. At that moment, the system notified him that a new location had opened, the rocky wasteland. He thought the contrast between them was too great, but the girl gently touched his shoulder and smiled softly. Their silhouettes stood side by side amid the falling snow, as if in a moment of peace before a new challenge. Kaito and Ellis noted the dim lighting and oppressive feeling in the narrow passage. Mira anxiously imagined the walls closing in, but Kaito calmly ordered them to move forward, relying on her for cover. Suddenly, a giant lizard burst out of the rock, striking him with its tail with devastating force. The boy realized that his opponent wasn't just strong, he was also sneaky, attacking from ambush. Assessing the lizard's massive head, Kaito warned them to look up, anticipating another attack. He then prepared to deliver the finishing blow, noticing that the monster's health bar was nearly depleted. The two companions watched in horror as the boulder suddenly came to life. It turned out to be a stone toad. One of them screamed, warning Haru, as the monster sent a huge rock fragment hurtling toward them. Kaito examined the object carefully and realized that the toad's body resembled a rounded stone. He then resolutely prepared to attack, gripping his weapon and concentrating his strength in his hands. With a powerful blow, he unleashed a powerful blast of energy against the wall, shattering it. An unexpected trophy was revealed behind the rubble, and his companions noted with delight that the enemy's defenses were far weaker than they had expected. The boy screamed in pain, and the girl standing behind him covered her ears, feeling the air around him fill with the sounds of growls and muffled footsteps of invisible monsters lurking nearby. Sara was ordered to finish off the enemies, and she fired a volley of arrows. Someone on the side commented on her determination, and another participant cheered happily, admiring her accuracy as the arrows struck their mark. The determined young man, deftly maneuvering, challenged his opponents, declaring that they would never catch him, even if they worked together. His confident movements aroused admiration and tense anticipation among the spectators. Kaito, smiling, soared into the air, seemingly defying gravity, while rocks and dust rained down around him. Ellis watched him in disbelief, wondering if he was actually flying. Landing with force, he calmly declared his opponent defeated and caught the spinning sword mid-air. Digital shards swirled around his hand, highlighting the completed attack. The young man admitted the movement was impressive and lamented that his character wasn't as charismatic. The girl laughed, noting that he seemed to be enjoying the adventure to the fullest and advised him to appreciate every moment in this new world. Kaito sat cross-legged on the ground, and Saira approached, promising to heal him and telling him to remain still. He protested angrily that she was talking to him as if he were a restless child, but obediently remained where he was. Ellis approached the professor with a question about why equipment wasn't dropping directly from monsters. She then sheepishly admitted that her knowledge was superficial, having only learned it from videos, and the professor listened attentively. Kaito wondered if crafting was the primary way to obtain equipment. Then the two girls explained that Arcadia's crafting system offers immense freedom, and that artisans have long been celebrated in the game, having been constantly busy since the servers launched. The young man was slicing through the air with his sword, his movements refined, when a bat flew past. The girl turned her head in surprise at the sound of footsteps, while the young man dreamily imagined wielding a custom-made weapon, filling with hope. Harusan confidently declared that humans couldn't fly and asked to be trusted with the enemies in the air. His partner objected, but was quickly silenced without further discussion, after which he reluctantly agreed. Kaito and Ellis cautiously examined the massive creature known as the Sand Eater. It resembled a hybrid of a scorpion and a crab, and then they noticed it was devouring something from beneath the sand. When the creature suddenly grabbed the boy with its claws, he cried out in terror, and Ellis tried to reassure him, telling him they wouldn't be eaten. But seeing the creature pull the prey toward its mouth, she began to doubt her own words. The frightened girl asked what would happen if someone died, but another player assured her nothing terrible would happen as long as they remained standing. Then the determined guy briefly said it was time to act, striking her with his confidence. Lux, with feigned heroism, declared that everyone should prepare for his glorious death. Kaito skeptically remarked that in such a cramped room, a scorpion would hardly summon helpers, while Saira watched thoughtfully, assessing the situation. In the silence, Kaito thought about Sora, noting how she never gave up despite the difficulties. One of the girls smiled and suggested that she could give up fighting and become a master craftsman if she so desired. The girl, hiding her nervousness, assured him she'd be fine. The guy confidently promised to rush in first and asked her to cover, speaking in the tone of a reliable partner he could trust to watch his back. The girl excitedly encouraged Haru to try harder, and he listened attentively, memorizing tactical advice, where to shoot and how to control the enemy's aggro to prevent them from getting closer. After a successful attack, they joyfully slapped each other, but a moment later the girl angrily told him he'd lied. The guy, confused, tried to justify himself, sincerely regretting having unwittingly offended her. Kaido shouted loudly, demanding that the giant scorpion-like monster stop, while Saira, clenching her fists, ran forward, determined to meet the threat head-on.
Kaido reacted instantly to the attack, shouting that he had a plan and activating his weapon-swapping technique.
The enemy, not understanding the context, called him a pervert, further complicating the situation while Kaido was already preparing to rapidly reconfigure his equipment. Despite his weak physical strength, he swung the massive weapon at full speed, focusing all his attention on his target. Debris and dust billowed around him, creating a chaotic whirlwind of battle, but the enemy remained unfazed. Kaido shouted the command quick change, instantly regrouped and prepared to strike again, promising to crush the enemy completely if he really wanted to play hard. He ordered Sora to keep running a little longer as the Sand Eater surged forward with terrifying force. Sora belatedly apologized, feeling the fatigue growing heavy on her legs and the danger growing ever closer. The girl tried to rise, but her knees wouldn't obey her, her muscles felt like lead. In the distance, someone called out her name in a voice that laced with both panic and concern.
Kaido viciously kicked the giant crab-like monster, demanding it remove its claws.
In response, the monster violently threw him aside, and Saira screamed in terror, rushing to its aid.
The guy suddenly grabbed the girl by the waist, hastily apologizing for the awkwardness.
She jumped in surprise and didn't have time to say anything as he quickly pulled her away from the line of fire.
Kaido carried Ellis in his arms, dodging a stream of projectiles.
One arrow whizzed past his face, inches from his face, and he gritted his teeth, quickening his pace up the rugged, rocky slopes. The boy struggled to avoid the rapid attacks, gradually losing his rhythm. Then the determined girl demanded to be put down, incredulously asking if he'd actually noticed the last blow, as his eyes darted around in confusion.
Saira, realizing the gravity of the situation, shouted that desperate situations required desperate action and asked if he had a plan.
At that moment, the system's mechanical eye warned that Kaido was about to fall between the monster's jaws.
Lux exclaimed irritably that she was sure she could finally fight at full strength.
But Kaido enthusiastically declared that a woman's cheer was the ultimate buff, even though deep down he knew he had failed again. He continued to hold Ellis in his arms, explaining that he had to outrun the enemy or they would be finished. The girl, turning pale, asked why he was still carrying her, fearing that if she slipped, the monster would instantly overtake them.
Kaido tightened his grip on her and announced it was time to hit top speed.
He darted away from the giant claw, and Ellis screamed, barely holding herself together, as he promised to show her true inhuman speed. The girl threw a huge axe, and the boy immediately shouted the command to switch weapons, deftly catching the blade in midair. They prepared to parry the oncoming blow in unison, acting as a single mechanism. Kaido confidently caught the falling girl, noting that with Lady Sora's divine protection, such things were easy. Nearby, another teammate watched this ostentatious gesture with surprise and slight irritation. The young man knelt down next to the girl lying on the ground, aware that he would likely be reprimanded later. He gently asked if she was okay, but received only a quiet groan in response. He admitted that his haste had delayed them and apologized awkwardly. The girl thanked him for his assistance, noting that despite the risk, his actions had allowed them to successfully complete the fight. After a brief silence, she told Haru she'd be logging off for the day. He inquired about her plans but decided to stay a little longer, and she nodded calmly, showing understanding.
Kaido thought about how sad it was to watch someone progress while you weren't around.
He then turned to Sora, but she confidently told him she wasn't trying to overtake him after all, even catching up to his success wouldn't bring him joy, only guilt. Realizing they were the only two who had begun the adventure at the same time, he suggested they consider it a special bond. The girl, blushing slightly, quietly repeated the word partners, as if savoring its meaning. She gently assured him that she didn't consider their relationship a burden and valued its development. He promised not to leave her behind and asked her to call him whenever she had time. The girl calmly advised him not to overexert himself and to speak up if things got tough. He smiled back and, with a slight chuckle, remarked that she knew how to flirt, adding that no guy would refuse a girl help. Elsewhere, a man watched the agile fighter on multiple screens, not believing he was a rookie. At that moment, Kaido himself looked around in surprise, as if he felt someone watching him. Later, he sat alone in front of a row of displays, reflecting that all he could do now was watch. A flash of memory flashed through his mind, a boy waving joyfully, while a voiceover asked why the person in charge always disappeared at the most critical moments. Kaito looked down, frowning, while Syra, next to him, smiled softly and noted that the number of abnormal players continued to grow, as if their presence itself was disrupting the established order of the world.